So one of the biggest changes coming with the second Diablo 4 expansion, Lord of Hatred, is going to have a pretty massive impact on a few specific pieces of gearing. So if you go to Diablo 4 on live right now and you go into the skill trees, a lot of your points will be in passives, which are primarily passive stat or damage increases, or maybe something like move speed increase or damage reduction. But generally, it's just using a bunch of skill points to get some pretty massive base power increases. And going into the expansion with the skill tree reworks, there will be no passives in the trees. That includes your capstones. Now, besides this being a pretty massive change for the general balancing of the game, especially where we get our power from as a character or as a general build, another pretty big change that this is going to have is on necklaces and on the Shroud of False Death mythic chest piece. And to get the quick one out of the way, the Shroud of False Death mythic chest piece for seasons upon seasons now, this has pretty much been the best in-slot chest piece for almost every build in the game. The primary reason being the implicit roll on this chest piece gives +1 to all passives. And like I just went over, getting a bunch of multiplicative damage increases and other very strong passive effects is absurdly strong. On some specific builds and classes, you could get hundreds of percent damage increase, and these would be multiplicative. So even if the Shroud of False Death had literally no other rolls on it except that +1 to all passives, it would still probably be used on almost as many builds. Some of the other rolls on the chest piece were good, and the unique effect of it is basically not used for much at all besides for movement speed while out of combat. And this is kind of the first thing that they will have to completely rework due to no longer having passives. If they just change this passive roll to some other random roll that just gave like a damage increase or something, this chest piece would be completely useless. So they have to completely remake this chest piece. And besides that being just basically a new mythic item in the game that could have a really cool or interesting effect to it, this also allows every build in the game to now have an option of a different chest piece, because that slot was pretty much reserved for Shroud of False Death for almost every build for the last handful of seasons. If you were trying to be a best in slot build, you just didn't have any other options besides the Shroud of False Death. Now there can be a bunch of different things. You could be using the new Shroud of False Death, whatever that ends up being. You could use any of the unique chest pieces, which depending on what class you are, could have a bunch of cool class specific ones like the Druid has. This could be using a different mythic chest piece like Tyrell's Might that's super defensive, that I think may end up being one of the better chest pieces in the game just because of how strong I think defensives are going to end up being. Or you could just use a legendary chest piece with one of the pretty strong defensive legendary aspects that generally don't get used because again, that slot is usually filled by the Shroud of False Death. Now, the second thing that I think is going to have a much larger impact on the game in many different ways are necklaces. Because if you've been playing Diablo 4 for a while now, you may have realized that the best necklaces for every build for pretty much the history of Diablo 4 as a game have always been get as many passive increases as you possibly can on your necklace. If you go and look at season 12 and you look at any build guide that has like the best possible items you can get, it'll be a necklace with 4 passive increases on that, because getting a passive increase affix roll is significantly stronger than basically any other affix you could get in the game, except maybe some unique affixes that are specific to that item. You get a, say, +3 to a passive. That passive could be like a 5% multiplicative damage increase and no other affix comes close. Or it could be something crazy like Envenom from a Druid that is essentially giving you like a 10% multiplicative damage increase per point, which you could then get like multiple greater affix rolls on it to where you could get some absurdly high damage increase. And also the difference between having a necklace with even like 2 or 3 passive rolls on it compared to a necklace with say only 1 passive roll on it is a massive power difference. And that also didn't really feel that good because it was just so rare to get a necklace that good. While it may feel good to get that necklace, trying to get those every season and trying to maybe get different ones for different builds of the same class just gets very tedious and kind of boring. So necklaces are now going to be completely different, and I'm not exactly sure what they're going to do with them. They could just remove all these passive rolls and have the necklace be the normal affixes we have right now, but I do hope they do something different with them. I hope they replace these passive affix rolls, much more unique rolls that you can only get on a necklace. I just hope they're not as strong. I hope they're more maybe gameplay impacting. This could also be a good place to add in some new really cool affixes that other ARPGs have that Diablo 4 doesn't have. Maybe recasting in a more interesting way that has the chance for the ability to essentially go off twice in terms of their damage. You could add like an arcing affix. You could do multicast. You could do splintering. You could do so many different cool affixes. And because it's the necklace slot that is in general a bit more of a unique slot that we've already been used to having unique rolls on it, they could really add some new unique affixes to them. But again, I'm just hoping if they do that they are more gameplay impacting stuff and not getting these affix rolls on this item just give you like hundreds of % of multiplicative damage increases. And outside of the possibility of them adding some cool new affixes specifically for the necklace, you will also be able to just use unique necklaces now, because previously, unless your build required a specific necklace for it to work, so an example would be like a boulder druid where you were required to have the dolmen stone for that build to actually work. But if you didn't have that requirement, you basically weren't ever going to use a unique or mythic necklace, because you could just get a legendary that could give you potentially hundreds of % of multiplicative damage increases, and it very much wasn't worth using a unique or using a mythic in that slot. But now that slot should be much more open to those rarities, and there's quite a lot of interesting unique amulets that could probably fit into a lot of builds. We also have the mythic amulet. Hopefully they add more mythics with the expansion, so maybe there'll be multiple. And while the melted heart of Selig may not be that great, I mean, I know it's gotten reworked multiple times by now, and it could get another rework with the expansion, because pretty much every unique, every legendary aspect, every mythic has gotten touched in some way for the expansion. But now you could potentially use the melted heart of Selig in your necklace slot without feeling too bad about it, because you're not losing this absurd damage multiplier that you could be getting on a legendary. And I know I've seen some people kind of sad that these passive affix rolls aren't going to exist anymore, because we will now have the Herodra Cube, which will give us a lot more control over our items. But me personally, I think this is actually another reason why these passive rolls won't exist on necklaces anymore, because now we're even going to have things in the Herodra Cube like adding another affix to items. So imagine right now you have a necklace where you want to get 4 passive increases on that necklace, which will just massively increase your power for every one you get. But now imagine adding a potential one on top of that where you have to keep farming a bunch of resources to keep trying to get necklaces that then you add this affix on top of. And we also don't know if you'll be able to even keep using the add affix on an item to keep re-rolling that affix. So if the passives are still in the game going into the expansion, there would be the possibility that you could get like a 4 passive affix necklace and then use the add affix roll on it and just not get another passive affix on it. And then you just lost the possibility of getting a best in slot rolled necklace from that. So I'm very much glad we're not going to have to worry about this passive item rolling. But again, I do very much hope that they add some cool and interesting new affixes to the affix pool in general, but also stuff that may specifically be on the necklace. Hopefully they're more gameplay impacting. Like some of the stuff I went over, like arcing or multicasting, could just be incredibly cool to get on a necklace, and are some things we've kind of been missing in Diablo 4. And not having these passives will also just be much better for balancing. Not only just not having them in the skill tree, so we won't be getting a ridiculous amount of additional power for very free skill points, but also not having them on necklaces will also just allow the balancing to be better, because it's kind of hard to balance. If you can have a build hundreds of % of multiplicative damage differences just off this one slot, that is absurdly hard to actually get that roll on that slot. So I think the balancing will just generally be tighter because of this change for multiple different aspects. But that's all I want to go over. So thanks for watching.